What's good, Time Clan? It is your boy KingTitanX here, back with another video, and you guys already know the deal. This is going to be the next part to what if Naofumi was the legendary dragon hero, and I'm not going to waste you guys' times. Let's just roll that intro and get into the video. Old Cray was furious. He honestly didn't know what he was thinking. He knew that it wasn't smart to involve himself with that beast when he reappeared in his home, his kingdom. He honestly wanted to just get rid of him right then and there. The bow and sword hero, though, they were the ones to actually convince him to let this mongrel stay. As a result, guess what happened? This monster decided to harm his soldiers. And the spear hero, he managed to even burn their face for crying out loud. Not even their best healing magic could completely heal this guy's face after that. After he literally gave him 3rd-degree burns, he still had a scar from the fire to this day. Not even their best healing magic. How? It didn't make sense. It never made sense to the king. How was this guy powerful enough to make a fool out of the spear hero? The fact he was so easily able to defeat him was unnerving. It didn't sit well with him at all. Old Cray would make sure that this guy, Naofumi, paid. Well, he would make sure that this mongrel paid. He refused to address him by his real name. When it came on to Naofumi, though, he would honestly just be traversing the region with Raphtalia. When it came on to Naofumi and Raphtalia, they were silent throughout the whole walk after that whole event and the banquet. Raphtalia would eventually decide to say something in order to end the awkward silence between the two of them. She would use this moment in order to thank Naofumi for rescuing her from the guards. Naofumi, though, he would look over to Raphtalia, and he would just sigh. He would tell her not to really mention it. Raphtalia would bring up how it might be good to visit the slave trader again to, well, get a new teammate, considering the amount of money they managed to make up at this point. Naofumi would at first be against it. Raphtalia would bring up that the king was probably looking for them now. Well, after what Naofumi did, she wouldn't put it past the king to even have guards running up, well, not guards, but knights trying to search for Naofumi in order to capture him or whatever. And they would probably use numbers against Naofumi as well, considering how Naofumi had proven how strong and capable he was in a fight, but they weren't too sure about what would happen if it was a whole army against Naofumi. Although that may be a bit excessive, there was a chance that Naofumi may not be able to take down such an army, such a large amount of people. Naofumi, hearing Raphtalia's reasoning, he would honestly have to agree with her. She even mentioned the other heroes as well. Although he was able to take down one of the heroes rather easily, there was an issue of him actually facing all 3 at once. She wasn't too sure if he was that strong to handle all 3 of them at once. It was possible, but did Naofumi really want to test his luck in that area? Naofumi, once again, had to agree with Raphtalia. She was bringing up very valid points. Eventually, he would cave in once he realized that she did have quite a bit of points, you could say. There was really no way of predicting what the others could do after all. When it came on to Ren, Itsuki, and Motoyasu, they all had different ways of fighting, considering how they had different weapons, and Naofumi would have to adjust to each and every form of combat against these three. He doubted that he would be able to knock all three out at once. Well, maybe he couldn't. Maybe he couldn't just end the fight quickly, but when it came on to having a pretty long match against these three all at once, that wasn't what Naofumi would really want to test his luck on. He wouldn't want to bet that against anybody, to be honest. They were deciding to stop by the slave trader and they would look around before Naofumi just decided to buy a lottery egg. Nothing in the slave trader's market seemed all that appealing to him besides the egg. He heard that there was a chance of him being able to birth a dragon after all. It wasn't anything new to tame a dragon where Naofumi came from, but he always wanted to do one. He always wanted to tame a dragon himself. He had always had to see other people within his tribe take down and tame all these large dragon predators, but he had never experienced taming a dragon himself. Raphtalia, she would bring up the whole issue of Naofumi raising a dragon though. Naofumi would basically hear Raphtalia comparing the two, wondering what would happen in case Naofumi actually did end up, birthing a dragon. Did that technically mean that Naofumi was adopting a dragon? Were they like his race or something? Naofumi always claimed to be from the dragon tribe, but Raphtalia, she wasn't exactly sure what that meant. Wasn't that like all forms of dragons were from his tribe and that they all came in varying sizes, or what? Naofumi would deny this though. He would simply explain that they just had a common ancestor, and nothing more, nothing less. They just evolved differently throughout the centuries. Just like how there are humans, demi-humans, and other animal species. Are they connected in one form or way? Yes, but at the same time, that doesn't necessarily mean they're super identical. Basically what's happening is that Naofumi would explain that although he's from the dragon tribe, that doesn't necessarily mean that all sorts of dragons fit into his tribe. It's just that they have common ancestors, just like Raphtalia has a connection to humans as well as other animals. They all share a common ancestor. That's the only similarity they really had, along with maybe some features here and there. Naofumi would head over to Loot Village in order to see how it was holding up after the wave once they had retrieved or bought the lottery egg. Naofumi would be pleased to see that it was doing pretty well. It was the first time he wasn't given judgmental eyes or stares of any kind since he first came to this world. He appreciated that. While in Loot Village, he would witness the egg he was carrying hatch. It was revealed that it genuinely was a baby dragon that Naofumi managed to hatch. He was surprised to see that they hatched so quickly though. He was expecting to wait at least another month or so, but he wasn't complaining. Throughout the day, Naofumi would notice that his pet dragon, they were growing at a rather rapid rate while they were leveling up, while Naofumi and Raphtalia, they were doing the usual hunting and killing of monsters, which would end up having them level up. Naofumi would be collecting some of the pelts, obviously, and sometimes cooking the animals as well, or the monsters. Eventually, he would see that his dragon, they managed to become large enough to ride on actually. They had grown thick red scales, horns, and their wings. They were rather large too. Motoyasu, He would show his scarred face into the village though, with mine and a couple soldiers soon after. He would declare himself as a new lord of this village apparently. The first thing that he planned to do though was add a heavy toll onto the village. Motoyasu did not know the value of money in this world at all. He just usually had his party members figure that out for him. Now for me, I kind of figured that as well. He found that the price was rather ridiculous for such a poor village, and he would be forced to step in once again against Motoyasu. He saw how half of Motoyasu's face had still been charred from his attack that night. He immediately figured that this wasn't going to end well at all. He wouldn't be able to just convince Motoyasu to at the very least lower the toll to something more reasonable for the villagers. Motoyasu was most likely stubborn, probably bitter over that night, and if Naofumi tried to talk down to him in any way, for all Naofumi knew, well, Motoyasu may even try to raise the taxes that he would be putting onto the villagers. Naofumi would walk up to the front of the audience, and as soon as Motoyasu noticed Naofumi's face once again, he would begin to snarl, but he would quickly regain his composure. He would point his staff toward Naofumi and inform the guards to arrest him right here, right now. Naofumi, he would raise an eyebrow in confusion, but he would also notice that the guards or the soldiers, they were cautiously gathering around Naofumi. Naofumi, he would simply flare up his battle aura, and this would make the guards fearful. They weren't necessarily able to see his aura, but they could feel it. He would paralyze the guards, and he would stare seriously at Motoyasu, the blonde. He would declare that Naofumi had become a criminal within Melty. The king had declared Naofumi to be a criminal, and that he even had a bounty now. Anyone who could bring the king Naofumi's head, they would be rewarded 100 gold pieces. Naofumi wouldn't be all that surprised, to be honest. He kind of figured that the king already did not like him, and that stunt he pulled the other night definitely didn't put him in any better standing with the king. Although he did find it to be a bit foolish that the king would try to straight up kill him. After all, he was a hero summoned to this world. Even if the king didn't want to acknowledge it, it was still true. And currently, he was probably the strongest one out of them all by a substantial amount at base. This was not including whenever he used his battle aura, which amplified his strength. A mysterious figure they would appear in the way though, in front of mine. They would hand her a piece of paper. When reading it, mine would crush it in her hands before telling Motoyasu that they should leave. Motoyasu, he would refuse though. He wanted to fight Naofumi and get his revenge for that humiliating defeat from last time. Mine would be annoyed at how stubborn Motoyasu was being today, but she would suggest that, well, Motoyasu race Naofumi. Why not? She was well aware already that Motoyasu, well, he obviously stood no chance against Naofumi in a straight up fight. But there was a chance he could win against Naofumi in a race. Motoyasu, he would accept the offer in hopes that he could regain some of his pride that way. Naofumi would also accept, and the two would mount their dragons. But despite Motoyasu's best efforts, Naofumi's dragon would continuously outpace him. She would try to tamper with the race in order for it to go in Motoyasu's favor, but Naofumi would witness the incantations attempted to be made and cancel them out using his disturbed magic. mind would find herself incapable of using her magic in her right arm. She would try to get the soldiers up in order to help in her efforts against Naofumi. Although some were able to slow him down a bit, they weren't able to slow him down for very long. They were very minimal in the long run. And Naofumi, he would actually still end up winning the race. Naofumi would win, and Motoyasu, he would be frustrated beyond relief. Well, not relief, but belief. He was contemplating whether or not to stab Naofumi through the back while he wasn't paying attention. But the villagers, they would catch on to what Motoyasu was thinking, and they would immediately shoo him away, forcing him to leave the village. Once again, Motoyasu, he had been humiliated. He would tighten his grip on his spear as he left. The village elder would give Naofumi a carriage as a reward for winning the race against Motoyasu, though, alongside a commercial bill. This would basically allow Naofumi to be able to go to all sorts of villages or even kingdoms without needing much of a reason. Naofumi will be confused at first until they explain the purpose of the commercial bill. When he came onto the carriage, he figured that it would just make things a bit easier for travel. He could probably store up a couple of things within the carriage as well. Before Naofumi left, he supposed he would need to also name his pet dragon, in which he would decide to name them very uncreatively Drago. Yeah, you heard me right. Raftalia, she would just facepalm hearing the name and suggest Ragul instead. Naofumi liked it. Naofumi also noticed that Ragul had become rather large as well. They were, well, even larger than Motoyasu's dragon at this point. They were large enough for both Naofumi and Raftalia to technically ride on at this point. Heck, maybe they could even fly on the dragon if they really wanted. That's how big they were getting. Naofumi's party would leave and begin their new journeys from there on. Naofumi remembered hearing Motoyasu mention how he was apparently a wanted criminal during their travels, and he would be pondering this. He would be questioning why this was the case. Well, not why, but more so what else he could learn. He wanted to find out more about his new criminal record, you could say. He would hear some rumors regarding the other heroes from time to time, but he would also have some run-ins with some bandits who were hoping to collect Naofumi's bounty. They always failed. I'm gonna keep it a buck with y'all. He would use these opportunities to collect some information on the Kingville and the allegations that he had against Naofumi. Naofumi would laugh hearing that the king was actually getting aggravated with how he wasn't able to get his hands on Naofumi despite the bounty that he had given him. He also heard some of the allegations and he had exaggerated the events that transpired, or however that word is. I'm gonna use transpired in his kingdom that night, in his castle. Some of the events were completely made up, like Naofumi attempting to kill the other three heroes, which would leave Melvermark in serious danger or whatever, but Naofumi already knew that all of these were just lies that the king made up in order to make sense of his bounty. He had even begun to raise it, apparently, but the only ones who could hold a candle to Naofumi at this point were the other three heroes, which really wasn't saying much for the three, considering how easily Naofumi managed to defeat Motoyasu. But during one of his trips, Naofumi would actually save an accessory dealer from getting robbed by bandits. Naofumi would get into some dialogue with this merchant, mentioning how annoying these guys could be, and the merchant, out of his appreciation for Naofumi saving him, would actually decide to teach Raphtalia magic. He would also, well, teach Naofumi about marketing skills and how to craft items as well. He wanted to teach Naofumi magic, but Naofumi, well, it seemed as if he already knew rather advanced skills in terms of magic. Skills that he hadn't even seen before, in all honesty. Before Naofumi and the merchant were deciding to part ways, the merchant would actually recommend a potential business opportunity in a region by the name of Lerno Village. Naofumi, Raphtalia, and Regolde would head over to Lerno Village, only to see that it was infested with vines and plant monsters. Naofumi would find out that this was Motoyasu's doing, in which he had apparently had the bright idea of gifting the people here a miracle seed. Yeah, that seed was cursed. It was meant to help with the people's famine, but it grew out of control when Motoyasu left. So, that's a W in Motoyasu's book. The people would commission Naofumi to exterminate the source of their torment. Naofumi would bring down most of the plant monsters, while Raphtalia, she would just cut through others. Regolde would claw through their fair share of enemies as well until they reached the source of it all. Naofumi would destroy it, causing for the rest of the creatures to immediately die as well. Naofumi would take some of the seeds though and rework them in a more viable form of crop production, something that wouldn't grow out of control. Naofumi would take some of their crops as a form of payment, the villagers obviously, figuring that they'd be pretty good when mixing it with their next hunt. You know, adding some fruits and vegetables to like some pig, you know, like get some bell peppers, some thyme. You know what I'm talking about. Like maybe have some radish, tomato. Add that to your monster meat, and you get a whole new luxury. We talking Gordon Ramsay kind of luxury, man. But Naofumi's party, they would also decide to head over to Merso Village. Merso Village was their next business venture, in which they would find out about the terrible condition that it actually was currently in. The sword hero, Ren, was in the village a while ago and managed to slay a dragon. But there was one issue. This issue being that he did not get rid of the dragon's corpse afterwards. It's almost as if he forgot, or that he was still thinking that this was one of those virtual reality MMO games or whatever these guys maybe called it. Honestly, Naofumi wasn't completely sure, but he was just making some things on the spot. This was common knowledge, in Naofumi's opinion though, to get rid of the dragon's corpse afterwards. You always get rid of the dragon's corpse, no matter how big or small it was. He had to dispose of a good amount of dragon corpses back in his old world, so this wasn't anything new for Naofumi. So to find out that these guys, they were literally letting these animals rot, letting these dragons rot. Why? He didn't understand why. What was going through their head at that moment? It made absolutely no sense to Naofumi, but he figured that he would have to clean up this guy's dirty work. Naofumi and his party, they would just head up to get rid of the corpse, only to find that it was undead. Naofumi feared that this would happen. This was one of the main reasons why they needed to always get rid of these dragon corpses back home, because there were apparently some people who knew necromancy, for crying out loud, or like some form of death magic. They could literally manipulate the dead, and being able to manipulate a dragon's corpse, that was a no-go. Naofumi would just be forced to use his battle aura in order to defend himself against the zombie dragon's attacks. The dragon, they would try to claw at Naofumi, only to find that they weren't able to break through his defenses at all. Naofumi, he would charge forward, using his own claw technique in order to slice the dragon's arm off. Raphtalia, she would come right in, following right behind Naofumi, riding Rhaegal with her swords out. Raphtalia would take to the sky, jumping off of Rhaegal to aim for the undead dragon's head. The monster was about to shoot poisonous gas out of its mouth, but when it came onto Naofumi, he would make sure that that wasn't going to happen. He would punch them in the chest. Their chest would immediately collapse. Well, not collapse, but caved in at this moment. Raphtalia, she would jab her swords into the zombie dragon's head, which would force it open. The zombie attempted to get back up, but Naofumi would rip open their chest, ripping out their core. The light in the monster's eyes would disappear right after. Naofumi would observe the object, realizing the potential power that it held. He would decide to add some of it to his armor after he dealt with this idiot king that was named Ultcray. On the way back, they would meet up with a girl by the name of Melty. She was surrounded by Felolials, but they would all seem to flee the scene right when Naofumi and his dragon came in. Naofumi would be confused until Raphtalia mentioned that when it came on to Felolials and dragons, they had a natural disdain for each other. Naofumi found this to be rather interesting. He figured that while him being like part dragon as well, or being from the dragon tribe, even if Rhaegal wasn't here, they would probably still not want to be in close proximity of Naofumi. Melty would get Naofumi's attention though by requesting a favor from him, this being to, well, escort her home to Belramark's capital. Naofumi would be hesitant though, not wanting to deal with fighting off all of the guards, or having to interact with the other heroes. They would probably be very annoying and, well, a waste of energy. He was a criminal after all, and he still needed to speak with the beloved king or whatever about this nonsense. Melty would convince Naofumi to escort her though by mentioning how she was actually royalty. She had heard about what her father did and had been meaning to speak with him about it, hopefully being able to get the bounty removed. Naofumi was a hero after all, even if he wasn't the traditional shield hero, or even looked the part like the other heroes in terms of having a human appearance. Naofumi had a close enough resemblance to a human though. It's just that he mainly had scales and golden eyes. The golden eyes weren't much of an issue, but it was the scales. He had a human-like appearance though, but it wasn't completely human. At the same time, Raphtalia, she would urge Naofumi to believe Melty though. When the group made it to Castletown after Raphtalia successfully managed to convince Naofumi to bring Melty along, they would immediately notice flyers with his face on it. Naofumi would notice that each had a varying price on his head. He would get strange looks as he walked into town with Melty. Motoyasu would have been nearby as well, and he would notice Naofumi. He would grip his spear in anger before charging at Naofumi. Naofumi, he would see this and just use his battle aura in order to block the attack. Motoyasu would be confused as to why he wasn't able to get past a certain proximity. It was as if there was a wall between him and Naofumi. Naofumi, though, he would use this moment in order to question what Motoyasu was doing with a great amount of annoyance at this point. Motoyasu would call out Naofumi for being a no-good criminal that deserved to be treated accordingly. Melty would just step in though, bringing up her royal status to Motoyasu, forcing him to stand down. Melty and Naofumi would depart afterwards, with Melty wanting to get Naofumi's charges, well, cleared. Naofumi wanted to upgrade his armor. He had hoped that the addition of this core would actually amplify his stats by a great amount. Naofumi wouldn't be able to get any services from Erhard though. The reason being, well, the fact that it was bad for business due to Naofumi's current status in the capital. Him just conversing with Naofumi was risky. Naofumi would be disappointed, but he would understand where Erhard was coming from. Naofumi would also realize that his team, they were in dire need of a class upgrade. He doubted that he would be allowed to do that with how stubborn the king was being right now. They wouldn't even bother going to the Dragon Hourglass in Melromike, and they would just leave before the king decided to send a whole squadron of soldiers at Naofumi's party. They didn't want to get themselves involved that much with the king's affairs like that, who would be against the capital in such a way, or making the king out to be the good guy, even more than already. The king was basically antagonizing Naofumi, and the king was just trying to make it so that Naofumi would just play into his hands, but Naofumi was not going to allow that to happen. The group would make their way over to a northern territory that had been suffering from a famine for a while now. This time though, it was Itsuki's fault. Since he decided to overthrow a corrupt government, but the issue in this was that the people he had gathered to overthrow said government actually took over after Itsuki left. They would erase all of his efforts, and the people were in an even worse situation than they were before. Naofumi, he would just pull out a couple of seeds that he still had from the whole bioplant incident, and he would hand it to some of the villagers and homes after being able to help with their famine. Naofumi would leave the scene once again with Raftalia and Regal. Right before the wave, Naofumi would meet up with Ren and Itsuki, who would accuse him of having actually stolen their rewards from the Adventurers Guild. Naofumi, he would just glare at the two before stating that the two of them actually failed to do their jobs properly. He had to do the cleanup work. He would explain that they needed to understand that when it came onto this world, it wasn't some children's game. They were dealing with life or death, for crying out loud. Ren left the dragon's corpse to rot, which made the people of Merso village deathly ill. Itsuki, he decided to lead a revolution that only caused for a new, more corrupt government to arise. Do they not understand where they are going wrong here? Naofumi had to resolve both of these problems while these two, they were playing fairies and elves. The boys, they would be speechless hearing this. Everyone would be teleported over to the wave soon after, with the boys having to reflect on their decisions, or that's at least what Naofumi hoped. When it came on to Naofumi, he would just decide to handle Looped Village like he had once did in the last wave. After dealing with the monsters in that area, Naofumi would explore the region for a bit, killing other monsters along the way. Raftalia should mention how it had been a while since the wave started, and Naofumi realized that Raftalia, she was actually right. It had been like over an hour or so since the wave started. And usually the waves, they didn't last this long, or at least not the last wave that they had to deal with. The trio would search for the other heroes. Naofumi would actually use this opportunity in order to try flying on Regal. Turns out that Regal could genuinely fly. They could fly pretty well with both Naofumi and Raftalia on his back. Naofumi would be pretty amazed to see Regal flying like this. This was probably going to be the closest to flying that Naofumi that Naofumi was ever going to be able to reach. So he was pretty excited about this point. But his mood would immediately sour when he saw what was going on with the three heroes. Apparently the trio of heroes, they were actually bickering amongst each other, and they were apparently trying to figure out where the boss was. Not necessarily trying to figure out, but more so using what sort of skills in order to figure out where the boss was. They were bickering about that. What should they use in order to find out where the boss was? And Naofumi was livid seeing this. Naofumi would just ask for Raphtalia to deal with finding the boss, since the heroes were about to risk losing several lives in order to win a petty argument. The boss will be revealed as a Soul Eater, which Naofumi was just killed by bombarding it with battle aura infused punches and claws. Naofumi was expecting for the wave to dissipate, but it was still here for some reason. Naofumi would be confused until he was forced to dodge an attack from a new enemy. They were wielding warfrans. They would introduce themselves as Glass as well. They were apparently here to kill the heroes. She would quickly overpower the other three heroes, and Naofumi would be the only one standing. He would be surprised, but he would get ready for a fight against this girl, Glass. Glass would immediately dash forward and towards Naofumi with a slashing attack ready, but Naofumi would just parry her attack. Naofumi would grab her arms and hold them down before headbutting Glass. She would be a bit dazed from the attack, but she wouldn't even be given the chance to find her footing once more, as Naofumi, he would just use his claw technique in order to slash across her chest before kneeing her in the face. Naofumi would just sucker punch her while being enhanced by his battle aura afterwards. Glass would realize at this moment how vicious of a fighter Naofumi was. He was on a whole other level compared to the rest of the heroes, and even her. She would try to outpace Naofumi though, attempting to get behind him. Right when she thought she had the upper hand though, Naofumi would just elbow her in the throat. Naofumi would turn around and grab her throat before pinning her down to the ground. Naofumi wouldn't waste any time now that he had her pinned to the ground. He would crush Glass's lungs before plunging his other arm through her chest, killing her. The wave would end afterwards. Naofumi was reconsidering his decision to kill this girl though. He probably could have gotten some more information out of her. Well, any information besides, oh, she was just here to kill the heroes. But she was clearly a threat that Naofumi had to deal with accordingly. For them to be able to take down the other three heroes so easily was concerning. The fact that the other three heroes weren't even able to take down the boss, not like he really even gave them a chance to even attempt to, with how ridiculous they were acting before, was also concerning. Raphtalia, Rhaegal, and the three other heroes, they would have witnessed how easily Naofumi was able to deal with Glass, and they had to admit it was honestly quite scary how strong Naofumi was, while Naofumi was going through his own inner conflict on whether or not these heroes were really, well, hero material, with just how much stronger Naofumi was in comparison to the other three heroes. It made no sense for these guys to even really be here, besides maybe being psychics for Naofumi. And Naofumi's mind, he didn't really want that. Motoyasu, on the other hand, he wanted Naofumi's strength. He wanted that sort of strength for himself. It wasn't fair that when it came on to Naofumi, he could be so strong in comparison to everybody else. He didn't even have a weapon, for crying out loud. Motoyasu, who would clutch his spear incredibly tight. He was tense. He would kill for that sort of power that Naofumi had. Naofumi didn't even look his way either after the wave. He completely ignored him. It was as if he really considered him to just be that much below him that he wasn't even worth looking at. Naofumi, he would make sure that he regretted every single time he embarrassed Motoyasu. Motoyasu would make sure to become stronger, one way or another. Motoyasu would have no idea what was breaking inside of his heart either. Naofumi, the next day, would have his presence requested by the king apparently. The guardians would explain that when it came on to the king, he decided to drop his challenges against Naofumi as well. Naofumi would decide to follow the guards though, wondering what gave the king a change of heart. Was it Melty? When he appeared before the king, he would demand to know how Naofumi became so strong. Naofumi would smirk hearing this before questioning why. Why would he be asking a beast such as himself something of that nature? After all, he was a no-good monster, not a hero, so why did it matter? The king would bring up how Naofumi was able to easily dispatch the boss and the strange being in that last wave that none of the other three heroes could handle. They needed the other three heroes to become stronger for any more success within the waves. Naofumi was obligated to tell him. Naofumi would laugh hearing this before letting things be straight. He would make this very clear to the king. Naofumi wasn't obligated to tell the king anything. He would mention that wasn't the same mentality the king had when he decided to make Naofumi a criminal, putting a bounty on his head. The king was being backed into a corner. Naofumi would admit he had been willing to tell the other heroes how he became so strong, well, as strong as he is now. But the king was really making him reconsider. The actions that the other heroes had done had really made Naofumi reconsider telling the heroes how he had managed to become so strong, especially when it came on to Motoyasu. This guy has been on his back for a good while now. This guy has basically been trying to threaten him for some unknown reason. Motoyasu seemed to really have it out for him. But Naofumi would let the king know one more thing. He would actually be willing to tell the other heroes how he became as strong as he is now if Uldekrey would give Naofumi his throne. Uldekrey would be appalled that he would even consider that to be an option, consider even saying such a thing. If Naofumi refused to tell him, well, the king supposed he would just have to get that information out of Naofumi's party members, one way or another. Naofumi knew exactly what the king meant. He would stump forward with smoke leaking out of his mouth. The king would panic seeing this. Naofumi would use the king as an example of what happened when somebody, if anybody, were to ever threaten his party. And yeah, that's all we got for right now. Titan Clan, it's your boy KingTitanX. You already know the deal. If you liked the video, hit that like button. If you've been rocking with my content for a while now, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment. Maybe also share as well. Share it to people that you know are interested in this sort of content. But beyond that, it's your boy KingTitanX signing out. Peace.